In this video, I'm going to show you how I completely remodeled this 120-year-old farmhouse kitchen. Let's get into it. Every big remodel starts with a fun demo day. So my brother-in-law, whose house this is, and I started by tearing out this huge pantry that you basically walk into and have to squeeze by walking into the kitchen. This is essentially the third pantry space they have, and with as many cabinets as the kitchen has as well, they decided it just wasn't necessary. Next, we started ripping down all the ceiling drywall. There were several wonky and rotten ceiling joists and tons of old water damage, so it all just had to come down. Here you can see an example of what I mean. I was just shooting some clips for Instagram and not planning on making a full YouTube video at first, so off camera I replaced the joists that needed it and added blocking and straightened the entire ceiling. I also installed a series of J-boxes and ran wiring for all the new can lighting. There was just one single ceiling fan light in the kitchen before, which was nowhere near centered in the room either, so I got that taken care of as well. After removing the pantry, that back wall had 4 different planes and they were nowhere near square, so the best thing to do was just frame up a whole new wall. That center section is a stairwell down to the unfinished basement, that's why it's insulated. I subbed out the new drywall work, which in hindsight I should have just done it myself, but nonetheless, in the 10 days, yes, 10 days they were in the house, I started working on all the new cabinet doors. There wasn't a single standard sized door in this kitchen, and they were all different, so it took lots of careful planning and labeling. They had started to just prime the old doors to reuse them, but I said there was no way we could do all this work and just repaint the ugly old doors. After chopping the boards down to rough length, I ripped them in half so they would fit on my joiner. Then I could flatten one face and square up one edge. Next, I ran the flat face down through the planer to make the opposite face coplanar and bring it down to a final thickness of 3/4 of an inch. Then I put the square edge along the table saw fence and ripped all the pieces down to their final width, and then cut them to final length as well. I typically use the router to make my doors, but after running a few through, it was clear that I needed to get my bit set sharpened. But that's the great thing about this simple shaker style. They can easily be done with just a table saw. Of course, you could even just buy 3/4 inch material and skip all those previous milling steps too, and you can make new cabinet doors with just a table saw. With the center grooves cut in all the pieces and the tongues cut on both ends of all the rails, it was just a matter of gluing and clamping them up. The drywall crew did the knockdown texture in the kitchen, so to cover the terrible mud job done in the adjoining family room, I applied it in there to match. The knockdown texture is most common in my area and works wonders at hiding imperfections. Then I painted both ceilings with 2 coats, rolling in opposite directions each time. While waiting for the coats of paint to dry, I continued on with some more demo. I have no clue why anyone in their right mind would run this panel backsplash all the way over on the sidewall like this. Removing the old vinyl flooring may be the only quick and easy thing I did in this house. After the ceiling had dried, I could finally get some good light in. The last bit of demo was removing the old laminate countertops. To see the rest of the process on building and pouring the new epoxy counters, make sure you check out that video that I already have posted. Next, I worked on cleaning up all the drywall damage by scraping and sanding any remaining loose paper off. I coated it all in Zinsser guards. This stuff works phenomenal at sealing up the bare paper. Then I used the roller method to apply a skim coat. This is just a 3/4 inch nap paint roller and works amazing at getting a quick and completely even coating of drywall mud on the wall, and then you can just smooth it out. After a coat of primer, it looked brand new again. There was already underlayment under the old vinyl floor in half the kitchen, so it would be smooth. So rather than trying to pull up a million staples removing it, adding a million more staples and finishing the rest of the area was the best move. This old wood floor was surprisingly really solid, so the 1/4 inch underlayment was perfectly fine and gave me a completely smooth surface to lay the new flooring. Next, I started working on refinishing the cabinets. I first cleaned them all with a degreaser and then sanded everything with 220 grit just to scuff up a clear coat so the primer would adhere well. I also sanded the cabinets they had already started to prime with a roller to get them nice and smooth. Then I went through and filled all the old hinge screw holes and any other dings. This was ultimately more work for me, but next I went through and primed and painted the inside of the cabinets separate from the face frames for 2 reasons. My HVLP gun wouldn't fit inside some of the cabinets or spray at the extreme angles. And secondly, I'm using a very expensive product to spray the face frames and didn't order enough to do the insides as well. For the insides, I'm still using a really high quality paint that I would recommend to even paint the face frames with a roller if you wanted to. It dries super hard and flat. With that done, I went ahead and got the new crown molding installed so I could spray it all together. First, since the new crown is wider than the old flat trim, I had to chisel out all the face frames where they overhang on the side of the cabinets. I'm a big fan of pre-assembling on the workbench as much as I can. It's the best way I've found to get perfect tight joints with proper clamping pressure so the glue dries and stays perfect. Then I could go ahead and prime the face frames and crown molding together. I'm using a Ben shellac based primer. It sands super good and works great at covering this darker wood and preventing tan and bleed through as well. So it actually looks white and not yellow when you're done. I sanded in between every coat and made sure they were completely dust free. For the top coat I used General Finishes Enduro White Poly, which is exactly as it sounds, a white pigmented poly. In my shop, I sprayed the same Ben primer and white poly on all the new doors and drawers. At this point, lumber prices had skyrocketed, so for the new shelves, I just bought a 4x8 sheet of white melamine, cut the shelves to size, and applied iron-on edge banding to the fronts. Less painting work for me, and durable, easy to clean shelves. The old drawer fronts were built into the boxes, so to reuse them I cut all 4 sides off the front and cut 3/4 of an inch off the old drawer sides so I could push them back and they would sit flush inside the cabinets. To install all the new fronts, I made this little jig to clamp to the cabinets. Then I could just set the new doors on it and they would all line up perfectly. I must have missed filming drilling all the hinge and drawer pull holes, but I did that back in my shop before painting. Now that the kitchen was looking super white, I went through and got some color on the walls. It's hard to see the gray on the white primer here while it was wet, but the transformation in the fame room is very satisfying. Definitely brightened it up a lot in there. You might have noticed there was an island in some of those last clips. I just worked with my brother-in-law off camera to come up with a good shape that worked well in the room. He only wanted one cabinet for a trash can, so we just framed the rest around it with studs just like walls and ran power to it from underneath in the basement. So next I could work on getting the island wrapped. I'm basically just making a bunch of framing panels and beveling all the outside corners. With the frames together, I used a rabbet bit in the router to make a recess for the center panel to set in. For the panel, I used 1/2" MDF and used the track hole to make kerf cuts in it to give the appearance of faux shiplap. Then I just applied glue and nailed the frame around it. Once I had all the panels made, I glued and clamped all the outside corners tight and nailed the panels off to the island framing. I definitely regret not finishing the center panels at least before installing, but after crawling around and doing a couple coats of primer and then paint, it turned out super clean. With all the painting done, I then went ahead and installed the new laminate flooring, which ran from the family room into the kitchen. Here I am installing the trash can hardware that I had mentioned before. It's a pretty easy addition you can make to most base cabinets. The house got all new doors throughout, so after getting all the new jambs hung, which was a super fun task in this old house, I took the doors back off to get them painted. Then I could start the finishing touches on this remodel with all new trim. Of course, pre-assembling as much as possible. I work with this classic colonial style base a lot around here, and this has become my favorite method for coping. Most of the waste can be chopped off with the miter saw, and then I just clean up the small profile with my cordless Dremel. As I mentioned, make sure you go check out my video on making these countertops if you haven't already. It was a really cool process and turned out great. The last thing to finish up was the new backsplash. This white glass and stainless steel mosaic was the perfect choice for this kitchen. This is a color matched grout caulk to finish off along the countertop. Just don't mind all the sloppiness, this tube was leaking like crazy. Now let's just enjoy this montage of before and afters. Obviously I couldn't take the time to show everything. Even though it was for family, which allowed me to film a lot of it, they were still a paying client after all and the work had to get done. But hopefully you enjoyed watching the transformation, and if you're not already, I'd appreciate it if you'd subscribe to the channel and give the video a like. Until next time, take care.